Welcome back to Good Law, Bad Law. On today's episode, we have something of a feel-good story for you. I remember when I was thinking about going to law school, and everyone I knew at the time said, oh my God, we don't need more lawyers, do we? But I would always say, well, maybe, but we need more good lawyers. And today, my guest is an example of exactly that. Tracie Johnson is a recent graduate of Temple University's Law School here in Philadelphia, and she created a 2-year fellowship, which is being sponsored by a big law firm, Greenberg Traurig, and the Equal Justice Works program. And her focus is working with young women of color in Philadelphia who have interacted with the criminal justice system, sometimes arrested but never convicted, sometimes going through some type of alternative to a prison type program, but nonetheless stigmatized because of that, dealing with the implications of that in terms of employment, pursuing higher education, dealing with the impact of that on their families. And she is working with these individuals throughout Philadelphia to try to expunge records, try to educate, try to bring some reason to their experience so that they can go on. And to hear her talk about what she's doing and the amazing people she's working with, boy, if you don't think there's enough good news, today's episode, I think, will bring it to you. Some really good news about a really strong, powerful program and a fascinating lawyer, Tracie Johnson, who's pursuing it. Stay tuned and hear her story. I know you'll enjoy it. On today's episode of Good Law, Bad Law, we're going to be looking at the criminal justice system and particularly the limitations that women in particular, and women of color even more in particular, face once they've had some interaction with the criminal justice system, afterwards dealing with employment restrictions and other ways in which their interaction with the criminal justice system may hamper their full re-entry into society. And to help us understand that is my guest here in the studio with us today, Tracie Johnson. Tracie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited about talking to you about this because on this program, we do tackle sometimes very complex legal issues. And this is one that strikes me that really gives us a window into the ways in which the law, for good and often for not so good, affects the lives of real people. Today we're talking about people here in Philadelphia.
Right.
And so I'm excited to talk to you about that. I know that you are involved in a very important project to help women of color who are dealing with this issue through a fellowship that you have with the Equal Justice Works program, sponsored by the law firm Greenberg Traurig. Is that right?
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to start by getting a little bit of your story because you've made a big commitment to this issue. And unlike the many lawyers who work their way through law school looking for some big corporate job doing securities work or working for big companies, you really approached law school, as I understand it, as a way to do public interest work and
Yes.
to work with real people and make change with real people in their lives. So I'm fascinated by that. I want to hear a little bit about your background and your story as we get into this.
So first, Aaron, again, thank you for having me. And also thank you for just recognizing how important this work is to the most vulnerable people in Philadelphia. And you're right that this is something I'm very passionate about. So I was born and raised in the Germantown area of Philadelphia. And, a lot of the problems that my clients face, I saw growing up in my own family, in my own community. And so just being able to recognize, being in law school and recognizing that those issues that I saw as problems were legal problems that had legal issues, that realization just made me that much more committed to wanting to do public interest work and in the city of Philadelphia to affect communities much like my own. So thank you for recognizing that. So just to give some background about how I even stumbled onto this project issue, I was a 2L I was a 2L summer certified legal intern at Community Legal Services on the Youth Justice Project there, helping young people expunge their juvenile records, advocating on their behalf to institutions of higher education. I was also like really interested at that time at looking at the barriers to access to education that young people with records have, and how the criminal records question on college applications actually deters young people from ever even completing the application, which as a person who cares about barriers to employment and barriers to earning income, we know that having a college education not only puts people on the right path, but the path to success and being able to provide for themselves. So that's a quick tangent, but like those are some of the issues I was working on. But even outside of that, working with young people to clear up their criminal records. And while I was doing that work, I noticed that I would come across a lot of young women of color, particularly Black women, ages 16 to 24, who were trying to work or trying to go back to school, but they were facing incredible barriers because of what was on their records. I also started to notice that I was also doing a lot of research, and we talk about how like women are nonviolent offenders, and we have to make more efforts to not criminalize what is social issues. Like these are issues that could be solved through alternatives, providing more social services, things of that sort. But so having that research in the back of my head, but also seeing women who do have assault charges and things of that nature on their record who are kind of not included in that conversation of how we talk about women with records. But when I would have a conversation with them, almost all of the women I spoke to, like those charges that are looked at so violently came from incidents of severe trauma, like women defending themselves against abusive partners, or, having been put into a situation where their trauma was significantly triggered and they were put in a place where they had to defend themselves. Yet they were charges were brought against them, and for a lot of the times, like once their story was heard, the charges were dropped, but they're still on the record, and it's still, having a really stigmatizing effect. So that just made me think about, wow, like the way women come into contact with the criminal justice system is different. The circumstances are different. We need to be more gender responsive and trauma informed when we're addressing the issues that they're facing, because criminalization isn't working, and it's taking women often who are primary caregivers of their families, mothers, away from their children.
Right, so this affects the whole family.
Yes, especially in a city like Philadelphia, which is what the most impoverished big city in the country. If we want to fight intergenerational poverty, we need to make sure these women who are mothers are able to work and thrive, because that's going to fare well for their children.
Well, and just before you go on, we've had a big debate in this country over separating parents from their children at the border. And not that isn't a hugely important issue, but of course, as you're pointing out, women who come into contact with the criminal justice system right here in Philadelphia, far from the border with Mexico, may be separated from their children, with huge impact on the whole family. So,
and like I'm glad that you point that out, because I think that we need better support for women, like for pretrial services. Like cash bail is a huge issue in Philadelphia, and there are women who are really, really poor and can't afford to pay.
They can't even get out of jail.
And so now they're sitting in jail away from their family. Young children who really need their mothers, all because they can't afford to get out of jail.
Well, before we get too much further into the project that you're running, and we're going to get into it in some detail, I want to go back over a couple of things you said about your own story. And just to be clear, you graduated last year from Temple University's law school.
I did.
One of the great law schools here in Philadelphia. And you also mentioned that you'd had an internship with Community Legal Services, but I'm not sure most people know what Community Legal Services is. So just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so Community Legal Services is a legal services nonprofit right here in Philadelphia. We have 2 office locations. One is at 1424 Chestnut Street downtown, and then another that's more in the community is right off of Broad and Erie at 1410 West Erie Avenue, I believe. And so we provide in a variety of different issues. We have an employment unit helping people with wage theft, discrimination, employment discrimination because of the criminal records, providing expungement, sealing services.
And this is all to people who can't afford to hire a private
exactly,
lawyer.
yeah.
Right?
So these are free legal services to
right.
people who can't afford to hire an attorney. And we have a housing unit who handles landlord-tenant issues. We have a consumer unit. We have a utilities unit. We have a bunch of different units that helps people.
Public housing.
Yeah. So we provide people with support for across a variety of different issues.
So tell us a little bit more about your own story, because obviously you're very passionate about this and comes from your own life experience. But there's a lot of directions you could have chosen to go in to pursue this passion. Why law school and why becoming a lawyer?
So interestingly enough, I thought I wanted to pursue journalism before law school also. I wrote for my local newspaper, the Germantown newspaper, and I really liked writing and researching and hearing people's stories and writing about people's stories. So after I graduated college, I was a Philly Fellow for 1 year at Philadelphia VIP, where they recruit volunteer attorneys to provide support to low-income Philadelphians. Right. So it's like a sister organization to community legal services.
VIP is Volunteers for the Indigent
yes.
program, right?
Yes.
I think they're actually right here in my own building.
When I walked in, I noticed. I was like, I used to work here for a year in this building.
That's right.
But I worked there as a communications associate, and I would write the stories about the amazing work that lawyers were doing, that the amazing work lawyers did for clients. And I feel like I had that moment where I was like, it's cool writing about this, but like I want to be the person who's doing it. Like I want to do it.
That's exactly what happened to me. That's exactly my story too. I was a journalist in newspapers, magazines, and television for a while, and I thought, I want to actually be the one that's doing the things that I'm writing about and not just writing about them. Not that there's anything wrong with being a journalist, of course, but I caught the bug for sure.
I have to say, I think it's amazing that you found a way to incorporate that passion into what you continue to do. So,
thanks.
You kind of didn't have to choose either or. So
well,
that's
I've come
amazing.
back to it. Podcast has been a way to come back to it for sure, and then to get to talk about things that I care about.
Yeah.
And
yes, I
ask questions because I want to know, and hopefully, in doing that, we have a good conversation. People, find something in that. Okay, so so you've got this fellowship. Tell us about that and how that created the opportunity for you to engage in this work.
So as I was saying before, I was noticing all of these trends about the way that women come into contact with the criminal justice system. And another thing I noticed that, a lot of our reentry support was male-oriented because women typically, weren't the population that was making up, the prison population or coming into contact with the criminal justice system. And so what I first talked to you about is like just people who women who haven't been to jail, but still, because they've been arrested, had to go to court. The case was thrown out. It's still on their record because it hasn't been expunged yet. Because expungement.
And that kind of thing has to be disclosed when you make an application for employment, doesn't it?
Well, in Philadelphia, under the Philadelphia Fair Chance Hiring Law, an employer cannot ask about your criminal record during the application process. Okay. So not on the application and not in the interview. It's only after they make a conditional offer for hire can they look at your background. But then they cannot look at arrests. They cannot look at, arrests that did not lead to convictions. And if there is a convictions, they cannot go, it has to be within the last 7 years. They can't not go beyond that. And if there is something recent, they have to kind of make do an analysis there, like look at how recent the crime was, look at the nature of the crime and how related it is to the job.
Yes, right.
It has to, for them to deny someone, there has to be an unacceptable risk of, liability for them. So even then, there's still protections that, employers still don't get it right. So we still have to, advocate for clients on their behalf to employers. But it's still stigmatizing, right? Because employers are still getting it wrong sometimes.
So in terms of employment, even having an arrest record without a conviction can still be enough of a stigma that it may be a block to certain types of employment.
Yeah, and in the age of the internet, if people know how to just go to the look it up on the court's website, your information is there. Right. So, the fact that information is publicly available is still stigmatizing, which is why expungement is important, because you can actually get their record destroyed.
Right. And of course, if there is a conviction, then you have a bigger issue.
Yeah.
Where else besides employment do these types of things, an arrest record or a conviction record?
Housing. Yeah.
Okay, tell us about that.
So I'm not a housing attorney, so I can't tell you about how that works, but I know in our housing unit, they often file expungement petitions on behalf of clients who, landlords are asking about this information or denying them housing because of this information. And so we've seen that. And like, as I kind of the earlier tangent I went on, having the question asked on a college application, people just think they're going to get denied and they just don't apply. Or we've seen that once they do answer yes to the question, they have to go through all of this, have to submit supplemental documents, like have to go through more than another person, which, depending on how long and gruesome and intrusive it is, can really be discouraging to especially a young person who's still very impressionable and,
well, and I imagine too, there's college, and then there's also other types of formal education, certain trade schools. It's not just people are thinking by college, you mean, a 4-year college. It could also be, certain trade programs or things of that nature that someone's interested in.
We see even in licensing, people who want to go to become a nurse or be licensed as a cosmetologist, like that's another thing, making sure people home health aid, people facing license and denials because of what's on their record,
especially issues where they may come into contact with children. Nursery school teachers, something like that.
We know as lawyers, you have
to as lawyers.
disclose that information.
And as lawyers too, that's right. So how did this fellowship come about? And then I want to get into what is this is all good background.
Making all of the observations I was making about how women and girls of color were coming into contact with the criminal justice system, and then how for women who have been incarcerated, went to jail or prison, when they were returning home, how their supports and services still was not, hadn't caught up to the fact that women are a fast-growing prison population. So I noticed that the women who were coming to me wanted to be teachers, home health aides, cosmetologists, do all of this work, but the job training and resources was in locksmithing, warehousing, truck driving, a lot of things that the clients I was working in particular, they weren't interested in because, a lot of the programming was more for males and men. Right. And that, for me, was like, that the feminist in me was like, oh, well, what if women want to do that work? Don't try to just, categorize, but it's just like, no, offer everything. Like, don't just authorize things that are particularly or specifically dominated by men. Right. And then if we're also thinking, if I'm dealing with women who have serious histories of trauma, they might not feel comfortable being the only woman in this field that's like, they're the only woman. Like, there's things to consider there. Right, and if that's all that's being offered, that doesn't help with recidivism. I think a lot of times we talk about helping people get jobs, but like, what about helping people find work that they love, like feeling like they're actualizing a dream? Because these are all things you need to help people stay home and stay free and be happy. Like, don't just offer anything, which is not saying that that's what's currently happening, but
to make people invested in a life, a community that is far more attractive than engaging in whatever behavior would lead them back into the criminal justice system.
So making all of those making all of those observations, I spoke with my supervisor about, turning this into a fellowship project. And everyone at CLS, in the employment unit, they had already noticed these trends, but there wasn't anyone who could dedicate the resources to really dive in and digging in deep into this. And so we came up with a fellowship proposal. I applied for Equal Justice Works, and they really loved it. I interviewed with the folks at Greenberg Traurig, and they also really loved it. So
tell us what each of those is.
So Equal Justice Works is one of I think it's the biggest funder of fellowships in America, and they select really passionate, public interest-minded law students in the hopes that they're launching the public interest careers of young lawyers who will go on to do really great, important work. So I was selected by them for a fellowship, and they paired me with Greenberg Trarick as the funder. And they're actually, I think, the largest funder for Equal Justice Works fellowships. So it just worked out. It was just interviewing, going over my fellowship application, but it felt so seamless because I can say that this was the issue area, because it was so new in the sense that we're looking at criminal justice reform, but in the lens of looking at the unique intersectional needs of women, and then women of color particularly. So I think, once we really, broke into the need and how there was kind of a gap to fill, everyone was so on board.
So what then is, and this is a 2-year fellowship.
Yes.
What exactly are you now doing?
So right now, helping people waive their supervision fees so that I can go on to seal, their records, helping people still go through with expungements, advocating on women's behalf to employers, because I said sometimes people still get it wrong, to let them know what they can and cannot consider, doing really targeted community outreach. So for young people, I go to Covenant House, which is a homeless youth shelter in Germantown, when we do a legal clinic there where we talk with young people about issues and help them identify that these issues are legal issues, and some of which we can provide support with. So that's how I get a lot of the young people who I provide juvenile expungement services to. And I also go to Interim House, which is a facility in Germantown that helps women who have a history of substance abuse and other issues and may have a criminal record. I go there to kind of, do similar screenings and help people with different issues. One new thing that I'm doing is there's a vacator law in Pennsylvania that allows women who have prostitution or related charges to have those convictions vacated and all of the fines and costs associated with it vacated if there's been some history of coercion. So there is a pimp involved, or someone, exploiting their drug addiction to cause them to do work and things of that sort. Being able to help women who, because if they have these records, which as women I've noticed, it's just so stigmatizing. People look at them as deviants, as these people who I can't have you work anywhere because of this charge. And being able to do that work and, help change the trajectory of these women who have made significant strides to change their lives around. And
it just seems
really
like the
amazing.
scope of the problem is so huge. I mean, we are in a very big city in Philadelphia, and the criminal justice system, as would be true anywhere, is only, has its limitations as far as how deeply into an individual's personal story and their context. Yeah. It's got to process you in and process you out and keep things moving and bring in the next case. The kinds of things you're talking about involve, a lot of time and attention to a person's individual story to understand it. What has that experience been like for you?
Amazing. One thing I try to do is really sit and talk and listen to people, to let them know that you can tell me, to listen, to be an ear, and help people kind of work through the trauma, because it can be triggering to have to talk about all of these awful things that have happened. So kind of being really delicate when I have to ask people their stories. Sometimes I don't have to, because, it's like, oh, this is what I have to do. We don't have to dive into that. But when I do, trying to be really delicate about having people rehash traumatizing situations and letting them know that this is a judgment-free zone. And what I love to do is talk about where they're going from here, like their goals, like what you want to do after this, their future, and just to see how everyone lights up. When they're talking about how much they want to move on. I've talked to women who tell me how long they've been clean from substance abuse issues, how they've, returning home, how they've been able to reunite with their families and their children's. Just hearing all of these different stories, it just makes me that much more fueled to want to do this work, because, these are women who I think are going to go on to do amazing things and contribute to society beautifully. So and their children, will be able to do so too if their parents are able to provide for them. Right.
Well, without mentioning any clients' names, I mean, can you give us an example of a case that you've worked on, and just sort of walk us through some of the steps and the outcome you were able to help bring about?
I remember I was working with a young girl, was 20 years old, couldn't get a job, was denied from, she was in school to do early childhood education and was denied from a daycare because of an ARD that was on her record. And ARD is, is a accelerated rehabilitative disposition program. So it's not a conviction. If you complete the program, you pay the fines and costs, do the probation, do all of that, you can get the record expunged. So it's not allowed to be considered. But she was still denied because of this. I offered to, advocate on her behalf. She's like, no, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I'll just get this done and then I'll go back because they're trying to work with me.
Yeah, I imagine people are, especially once they've been in the system in some way, that it's very intimidating.
Yeah.
I mean, no one wants, I'm sure people don't
especially if they
want to
go back.
Right.
They don't want to ruffle feathers if they want to go back.
If
they don't want to go back, they're like, oh, okay, And it's different. But so this young girl, I was able to get her record expunged. She brought in her ARD completion letter. I was able to get it expunged. And, she just went back to school. And it was like she was going to school for early childhood education. So she needed this off for when she graduated to be able to find better employment. But, she called me afterwards. She was like, thank you so much. Like, the job thing worked out. I was having housing issues because of this. I was getting denied, but, I'm not facing that anymore. But it was so important to me because she was young and just now starting out, but was facing such incredible barriers. So it was just amazing that she was able to get over that at a younger age before, she had gotten older and incurred more responsibilities. And that was also one of my first cases, so that's why that one sticks with me the most.
Yeah, that's a good one.
To be able to be like, hey, we got this done, and you can go off into your future free and clear without any worries about this record anymore.
There's it's just reminding me there's always a study you'll read about how lawyers are disillusioned with their work. They've gone through law school, they've incurred their debt, they've been pushed into some high-paying big firm job because they have debt, and maybe they don't think they have that choice, and then they find themselves 2, 3, 10 years down the line really unhappy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like your story at all. I mean, it just sounds like there's not only the work is what you want to be doing, but there's all kinds of rewards and gratification from what you're able to do for people who may not even realize, in fact, probably don't realize that there are things that can be done that can make such a big difference. You just need that help.
Yes. I feel like with young people in particular, it's so important because, you can realize that something is wrong, but not that hey, this is not right. I feel like with young people it's so important, and which is why I love the fact that we do a lot of targeted community outreach, going to Covenant House, Youth Build, all of these different organizations to meet young people. We, intervening at a point of crisis to say, hey, we can turn things around, and here's the supports and services that we can provide for that. Helping young people go to school, working with CCP's Reentry Project to make sure.
What is the CCP is what?
Reentry Project. So they kind of help people who have a record be able to go to community college and provide supports so far as I kind of figure out what track to go on and study. But, we've worked with them to help people go back to school. So, the education piece and the job piece is really, really important to me.
How much in your research have you seen other cities that have similar programs like the one you've come up with and are now working, or is this program here in Philadelphia something that could be seen as a model for other communities to follow?
I think it should be as a model. I think it could.
I think so too. That's why I'm wondering.
So, I don't think that I've researched that much of who else was doing this fellowship. I don't think that very many people have. I know that a colleague of mine, Natasha Felder, had a fellowship with the Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project looking at women and girls who are incarcerated, but that's not my focus population. Of course, reentry is important to me.
That's also in Philadelphia?
Yeah, also in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So she kind of started that off too. And, I was able to, a lot of the research that I was able to look at regarding women and girls came from the research that she had done. So I would kind of give her the nod as a person who had already started looking at women's issues before me.
But I'm thinking about other cities, New York, Chicago, LA, Dallas.
New York, they have, so this is not particular to this project, but New York, their legal aid Society has like this, they have a decarceration program, but they have this really cool like pretrial services program where like they help do bail applications for women to get them out early so that they don't have to sit in jail and can go back home and be with their families. But that's something I've been looking to, because I personally would love for Philadelphia to have a diversionary program that was specifically for women, that was trauma informed, that was gender responsive, that looked at the way that recognizes the ways that women come into contact with the criminal justice system.
And tell me what you mean by a diversion program.
So, and diverting away from contact with the criminal justice system. So I would love to see something pre-arrest. So when the person is arrested, saying, oh, is this prostitution? Is this retail theft? Is this drug abuse? Is this an assault situation? If it's assault, what happened here? Let's try to not send this person, not put this person in the system, bring them up on charges, and which is going to be stigmatizing and have collateral consequences, or send them, incarcerate them for this. I would love for there to see a program about that, because I think the research is already out there. We just need the solutions.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of research on alternatives.
Yes.
I mean, you mentioned ARD as one big example, but there does need to be more of that. We don't need more people in jails.
We don't.
I mean, and certainly not for the kind of offenses you're talking about, mostly nonviolent crimes, and crimes, as you say, that once you understand the context and you do understand the nature of the activity in a very different light.
Right.
So is that something you could see doing, following this fellowship ending? That's
one of the goals of my project. Working on at least trying to push for the implementation of a diversionary program for women. I've been, I went to this Rice and Tide conference and mentioned it to D.A. Krasner. He said, "Oh, that sounds like that'd be a great idea."
He's a pretty innovative DA.
Yeah,
he'd be the right person to talk to about something like that.
I feel like our city is in a good place where something like that could take off. So I've just been, trying to work with different people who are also in this work to see that come to fruition, come to light. I also would love to see like a career pathways program, like something that like maybe co-sponsored or hosted by the city of Philadelphia, that offers job training, connections to, if people want to go back to school, connections to accessing higher education, places like Career Wardrobe where people can be able to, find clothing to go interview, connecting people to us at Community Legal Services to provide support, addressing their record if they're eligible. Just a program where, centralizing all of the support that already exists.
Coordinating that,
coordinating it and, providing resources so that the service providers who are already doing amazing work and have been doing so for years can expand their services.
Right. Well, that seems to be the piece that you're bringing, because there are a lot of charitable organizations and nonprofits and community groups that do that kind of thing, like providing appropriate clothing for someone to go on a job interview. They may not have ever had that type of an outfit or no money to buy that type of outfit to be presentable, unlike the way I'm dressed today in shorts and a t-shirt. But for a job interview. But what strikes me as something you're bringing that's different is an understanding of the law, and being a lawyer, someone who can advocate for people in the criminal justice system, or because they've been in the criminal justice system. That piece and understanding that piece seems so vital.
Yeah. I work with, I am fortunate enough to work with like Tony Willis from Ardela's House, who's been doing this forever, helping women who are returning home, and the amazing people with the Reentry Think Tank and People's Paper Co-op who, offer employment to women who are returning home to, do artwork and, beautiful campaigns around different issues. So I feel like I'm fortunate enough to work with people who are already doing that, and like I get to talk to them and say, okay, so what's missing? What are the needs? What do we still need? Hearing from women who are directly impacted, to say, hey, this is what I needed when I was coming home. This is what helped me when I was coming home. This is what I wish I had when I was coming home. To be able to have those conversations and kind of see what's still missing, and how we can go about doing what's best for women.
Now, you mentioned that you thought about for a while a career in journalism. Are there ways in which through this fellowship you're going to be pursuing some writing about what you're doing, or writing up your results, or
I hope
something like that?
Yeah, maybe a report or something.
You should.
Yeah, do a report. I want to start writing op-eds about some of the things that I've been observing. There's definitely opportunity for that. Our communications associate at CLS, Caitlin Brown, she's been really helpful in scoping out opportunities for me to do stuff like that. When I first got here, I testified before City Council about the urgent need, about asking them to urge Philadelphia area colleges and universities to drop the criminal records from their application. We, so much about through doing this work already, the Common App has already dropped it. So we're trying to continue that movement of asking people to urging colleges and universities to ban that question from their applications. But like stuff like that, just being able to have
maybe a TED Talk. Think about it.
Goodness gracious, that would be
Well, we did. I mean, we actually had Judge Victoria Pratt on the podcast a couple of months ago. She's awesome, and she really came to prominence through a TED Talk about her experiences in municipal court and bringing a lot of different attitude and procedures to the courtroom, where she was seeing some of the similar kind of situations you've been talking about, and really did a great job. And we had her on the podcast too, which was great to help kind of get the word out about what she's doing. There might be some ways that you could do that. People need to know and understand it, which leads to the next question I was thinking of asking you, which is if you wanted to and you do have an audience of listeners to this program available. So what would you say to people are the things that are most important for people to understand about the problem that you're trying to address right now?
That it's really stigmatizing. I think sometimes if it's just an arrest, like if it's not a conviction, people don't think that arrests are still stigmatizing. Like the fact that you can look up records, like the fact that this information is publicly available is really stigmatizing for our clients, and that I think like changing the narrative around the work. Like I'm happy to say that I worked with people who have criminal records, who are like these amazing people who are going to go on and do amazing things. Like changing the narrative around, negatively thinking about people who have criminal records. Like I think that that's still deeply important, and I feel like we still haven't won that narrative war yet.
And stigma is a huge thing. I mean, you put your finger on something so important. If you said to the average person, most of us want to tell you this story about this person who has a criminal record, the first thing people are going to think about is a negative impression of that person. You're describing these people as amazing people, as people who are going to go on and really become contributing members of our society and have families and children and all. It's just, even in just what you've said so far, you are changing the narrative, because there are those people, and most of us don't think of it that way at all.
Yeah, I even had to challenge myself. I was like, oh, people have made mistakes, second chances. And then when I learned a lot of people didn't even make a mistake, like wrong place at the wrong time, or, just pleading to things because they were afraid. And I'm just like, sometimes this is literally just the system. These aren't people who have made mistakes. These are people who have been eaten alive by oppression and all of these different things. Right. So I had to challenge my own way of like talking about it also. So I think that that's really important.
If you were talking to a law student who was looking for something to do after law school, what would you say to that person to get them interested in what you're doing?
I would just let them know how rewarding it is, how fulfilling the work is, and how there's nothing like when I get calls from people like, oh, can I send you flowers? Can I send you a card? Can I do this? Like the fact that you listen to me. Because I'll sit there. If I have the time, I'll sit there and listen to you for 30 minutes. Like, it can have nothing to do with what I'm trying to work on. Like, I try to still be mindful of my time. But listening to people, there's nothing more rewarding to that. And I always tell them, like, you don't have to send me anything. Like, I signed up to do this. Like, this is what I love to do. Like, the fact that you're telling me about how things have worked out for you ever since then, like, that's amazing. Just hearing that joy, that is a very irreplaceable feeling.
You know, I remember when I went to was talking about going to law school after a career in journalism, and overwhelmingly what I would hear from people is, we don't need more lawyers. What are you doing? You know, and my answer was always, but we do need more good lawyers. Mm-hmm. And I think you're, you know, if it wouldn't embarrass you to say, I think you're living proof of that. And, you know, I do hope people will listen to this. And in some ways what you're talking about, 'cause we call this program Good Law, Bad Law. In some ways what you're talking about are some of the ways the law is bad, or not intentionally bad, but just in the way it functions and the way a big system, particularly in a big city like Philadelphia, it functions very imperfectly. But at the same time, you're talking about ways in which the law, I think, is great, because it can really make a difference in somebody's life.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're doing. I think it's terrific. How can people find out more about what you're doing, contact you, contact Community Legal Services if they want to help, if they want to get more information, if they want to donate, whatever it might be?
So
give us all that.
Yes, our website is www.clsphila.org. You'll find me on that website. You'll find my contact information on that website. Sorry, my voice just went out. We have our Twitter and our Instagram and our Facebook. I actually don't.
All right, well, we'll look it up and we'll post it. We'll post that for you.
Yeah, my name is Tracie Johnson. You can just search me if you want on Facebook.
Your name is Tracie Johnson.
CIE. That's the important part.
TRACIE Johnson, an Equal Justice Works Fellow, a graduate last year of the Temple James Beasley School of Law here in Philadelphia. I see you also went to Ursinus College.
I did.
Just outside of Philadelphia, and doing some really, really great, important work. I hope you do write about it.
Thank you.
I hope you continue to get the word out. And I thank you for being on Good Law, Bad Law so we could share what you're doing with all our listeners.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Good. Thank you.